Five Nights at Freddy's 2. They had really just one job: be bigger, be scarier, and take us deeper into the lore that we love. But what we actually got was a deeply confusing and frustrating mess. When the first Five Nights at Freddy's movie hit theaters, it was a phenomenon. Now, critics may have hated it, but fans showed up in droves, making it a box office smash. It proved that this franchise had a massive, passionate audience ready for the big screen. A sequel wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. And on paper, it sounded like everything that we ever would have wanted. More animatronics, including the toy versions and the long-awaited debut of the Marionettes. It promised to expand the universe and answer some of the first film's questions. The hype was real, but this is where the problems begin. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 tries so hard to be bigger and scarier that it just becomes bloated and tangled. It is a frustrated film that cares more about cramming in lore than telling a story that makes any sense. The biggest failure of this film is its screenplay, which was penned exclusively by series creator Scott Cawthon, and you can feel it. Let's start with the main antagonist, the Marionette. Now, the movie opens in 1982 with a flashback to a little girl named Charlotte. Now, she sees William Afton in his spring Bonnie suit trying to murder another child, a little boy. Now, all of the adults around her just brush her off, so she ends up intervening herself and gets fatally stabbed by Afton herself. As she dies, the Marionette animatronic appears and it catches her body, and her soul just ends up fusing with this thing. Now, right away, the internal logic is just broken. The movie suggests that Charlotte had some sort of spiritual connection to this marionette before she even died. This broken foundation infects the entire plot. This marionette, possessed by Charlotte's vengeful spirit, becomes the main villain of the entire film. But what does she want? Her motivation is a constant moving target. First of all, she wants revenge on all of the adults who didn't save her and didn't listen to her at the start of the movie. Then her rage shifts to all adults. Then it just becomes this vague, unidentified anger at pretty much everyone. It's revealed later that she doesn't even blame William Afton for her death. She blames the parents who ignored her. This is the entire premise of the movie's conflict, and it's built on sand. Why would her spirit, a direct victim of a serial killer, redirect its eternal rage onto bystanders? There's a big fat question mark there. The film doesn't bother to explain, it just asks you to accept it so the plot can keep moving. All of this just the roll of it approach is just a constant problem throughout. The movie is littered with clumsy exposition and moments where the story just stops making sense just to justify the next fan reference. The film introduces this idea that the marionette can possess people, transferring its soul into them. Now, this happens to Abby at one point in the movie, and also later on Vanessa. But this power has never been a core concept in the game's lore like this. It feels less like a natural rule of the world and more like a cheap tool invented on the spot to create conflict, making the movie feel like a different, lesser horror film, a lot like Megan Part 2. And then there is the second Michael. Now, the first film centered on Josh Hutcherson as Mike Schmitz. Now, this movie introduces a new character played by Freddie Carter, who is revealed to be Michael Afton, William Afton's son from the games. So now we have two main characters named Mike and Michael. Now, this choice is just a perfect metaphor for the film's biggest problem. It's so focused on replicating a game lore beat for beat that it actually ignores the basics of clear filmmaking. Having two protagonists with the same name is just confusing for any casual viewer and serves no real purpose other than to create a gotcha moment for the hardcore fans. Now, any story, even a horror story, needs a hero. We need a central character to follow someone whose motivations that we get, whose struggles provide the emotional core. Now, the first film, for all of its flaws, understood this, and it was Mike Schmidt's story. Now, Five Nights at Freddy's 2, in its quest to be bigger, completely loses focus and ends up with no clear protagonists. The movie just bounces aimlessly between Mike and his sister Abby and also Vanessa, without ever really committing to one point of view. The result is just this story that feels disjointed and emotionally hollow. Let's just take a quick look at Josh Hutcherson's, character, Mike. In the first film, he was driven by guilt and a desperate need to protect his sister. But in this film, he's stunningly passive. He spends most of the movie looking absolutely miserable in every single scene that he is in, and his motivation is just wanting to take care of Abby. But he does very little to actually do that until up to maybe the last 20 minutes of the movie. For a huge chunk of the runtime, he stays behind the old Pete Sierra for reasons that are never really explained, making him feel completely disconnected from the main threat. His character ends up ignoring obvious warning signs that should have ended the movie maybe an hour earlier, making him not just passive, but it was making his character frustratingly dumb, and that's it really was annoying to see because I loved his character in the first movie. And with his character sidelined, the film seems to want Vanessa to carry the emotional weight. Now, Vanessa, played by Elizabeth Lale, she's actively trying to possess the trauma of her father being a serial killer. She really does most of the work moving the plot forward, yet the film gives her this bizarre, illogical relationship with Mike. He reacts to her efforts and her trauma with almost total indifference, creating this dynamic that has zero emotional logic. I mean, how are we supposed to invest in their potential partnership when one half of it seems completely checked out? And then, of course, there's Abby. Her story is supposedly about her longing to reconnect with her friends, basically the ghosts of the animatronics from the first film. Now, this actually could have been a deeply disturbing idea. A young girl, traumatized by her near-death experience, forms an unhealthy attachment to the very things that almost killed her. The film could have explored this as a psychic, hypnotic bond, like the haunting house in the Haunting of Hill House movie, but instead, the movie plays her friendship with the ghost as completely straight and uplifting. This makes Abby seem less like a complex, traumatized child and more like the kind of idiotic kid who would normally die early on in the movie. Her entire character feels like a plot device to move other pieces into place, and again, very different to her character from the first movie. This film is just so bloated with underdeveloped characters all throughout the movie and tons of subplots that go absolutely nowhere. And it's hard to even tell what the main story is supposed to be. We have a team of paranormal investigators led by, McKenna Grace, who show up in the movie. Now, they deliver some exposition and then they end up getting killed off in a very disappointingly bloodless way. We also have the introduction of Henry Emily, played by Skeet Ulrich, a hugely important character from the games who is criminally underused. And of course, there's Matthew Lillard as William Afron, who is reduced to a completely superfluous and pointless nightmare sequence. Basically, he's in it just for like a sort of cameo appearance to make fans cheer. The film is constantly introducing promising ideas and characters only to completely waste them. And again, without a clear protagonist to ground us all, we're just here to sort of like float adrift in a sea that's full of half-baked ideas. Now, director Emma Tammy mentioned in interviews that fans really wanted this one to be even scarier. And on the surface, this film does try. It's definitely more intense and it has more violence than the first one. There are more animatronics, more action, and a lot more jump scares, but more scares don't equal to a scarier movie. The scares feel disconnected, often relying on the cheap tricks instead of the genuine atmospheric dread that made the games so terrifying. Now let's give credit where it's due. There are moments here that work. All in all, the film delivers around 15 minutes of genuinely terrific thrills that feel ripped straight from the games. The design and movement of the marionette in particular are highlights, giving the film its most atmospheric scares. This new antagonist is legitimately creepy, and its introduction is one of the few horror elements that truly does land. But these effective moments are just island in an ocean, surrounded by baffling plot threads and a story so messy that it's impossible to build any real tension. The film's biggest horror problem is its over-reliance on the cheap jump scares. The formula just gets old super fast. I mean, you got the quieter moment, the sudden loud noise, and then a spooky face pops up on screen. A few of them work, but the sheer number of them just cheapens the experience. It trades that slow, creeping dread of the game version, that feeling of being trapped, vulnerable, and hunted for easy surface level jolts is just not okay for me. At moments, it was borderlining on just completely stupid. Now, the animatronics themselves, while they do look amazing, they often come across as slow and unthreatening. You got like Chica, who is rampaging through a house. It should be terrifying, but the whole sequence just lacks any real menace. The tone of this movie is also just all over the place. Now, Tammy tried to push both the scares and the fun factor, but the execution is very, very clumsy. The film can't decide if it wants to be a genuinely frightening supernatural horror film or a more, light-hearted comedic adventure. One moment we have, the unnerving image of the marionette possessing a person. The next we have a subplot about a school science fair. This tonal whiplash prevents you from ever fully immersing yourself in the horror. You're never allowed to truly feel scared because the film is constantly winking at you with a reference of cutting away to a different, less interesting plotline. And that PG-13 rating, while it was expected, it feels even more restrictive here than the first film, because despite claims that the movie apparently pushed the limits of its rating, many of the kills are off-screen or out of focus with surprisingly little blood. This isn't about wanting gore for gore's sake. It's about the film pulling its punches at every critical moment. Now, it sets up terrifying scenarios but refuses to deliver a satisfying, scary payoff. The horror just feels very sanitized and very safe, which is the last thing you want from a movie about killer animatronics. The result is just this film that, despite its best efforts, it's very rarely scary and often just loud. What was the most confusing part of the movie for you guys? Was it the lore, or was it the characters, or was it something else entirely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments box below. One of the undeniable wins of the first movie was its production design and practical effects. Jim Henson's Creature Shop brought the animatronics to life with a real tangible weight that something that CGI just can't ever replicate. Now, the sequel doubles down on this, and on a purely technical level, the results are breathtaking. I will give it to them. The new toy animatronics are unsettlingly pristine. You got their shiny plastic shells, perfectly capturing that uncanny valley feeling from the second game. The real standouts, though, is basically the marionette and the mangle, which have been described as some of the most complex puppets the Creature Shop has ever made, requiring a huge effort to bring them to life on the screen. You can clearly see that the sets are just bigger, more ambitious. We see the animatronics step out into the real world, which the director hoped would create new, hilarious, and also scary situations. There's a full-scale working carousel with a massive 20-foot-long riverboat ride built practically on set. You can clearly see, they've really spent a lot of money. You can see the bigger budget on the screen, but this is where the praise has to stop. Because all of its technical skill, the world of Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is just this confusing, illogical space that undermines its own visuals. The film has bigger sets, but the geography makes no sense. The climax takes place at the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, but the layout of the building is a complete mystery. We see a sprawling lobby, a pirate-themed area, a literal river running through the building, a basement, and of course the security office. But there is absolutely no sense of how these places connect. Characters just seem to teleport from one location to the next. Now, this isn't just some small nitpick from myself. It is actually a fundamental failure of cinematic language, because in a horror movie about surviving in a confined space, geography is everything. The audience needs to understand the layout to feel the tension. I mean, when a character is running from a monster, we need to know where they are and where they are going. By failing to establish a coherent map, the film completely guts the tension of its own finale. This confusion extends to the film's brief attempt at recreating the gameplay. There is actually a moment celebrated by a lot of fans who, I've seen this movie. Basically, it's a scene where Mike finally sits in the security office chair, and the film attempts a beat-by-beat recreation of the game. For a fleeting moment, the movie absolutely does soar, but it's just that, a fleeting moment. This scene is more of a visual nod than a genuine integration of the game's survival horror. It feels like an obligation, a box to be checked off a fan service list, rather than a sequence that grows organically from the story. And that's this film in a nutshell. It shows you things you recognize, but it fails to understand why those things were so effective in the first place. Okay. After all of that criticism, it's only fair to acknowledge something important. For a very specific part of the audience, this movie absolutely works. The gap between critic and audience scores for this film is absolutely massive. This isn't a mistake, it reveals who the movie was truly made for: the die-hard, lore-obsessed fan base. Now, for those fans of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, this is a huge success for them. It's a film that speaks their language. There was actually one review that I read, and I think this one reviewer put it this way: fans of the games will be overjoyed by how beautifully these animatronics are brought to life, and all of the visuals and musical references to a series they've loved for years. This movie is drenched in that sort of fan service, from visual Easter eggs and musical cues to cameos from online personalities popular in the fandom. The introduction of Michael Afton, the Marionette's origin story, and the appearance of the toy animatronics are all moments designed to make people who have spent years piecing together the games, the lore's cheer. Now, one fan summed it up perfectly, giving the movie a split rating: 6 out of 10 for general audiences, but a 10 out of 10 for the fandom. So where does that leave us? Well, this movie is a paradox. It has all of the ingredients of a special gateway horror franchise: jaw-dropping practical animatronics, a handful of good scares, and a budget upgrade that you can clearly see in every frame of this movie. And yet all of these fantastic elements are just completely crippled by a screenplay convoluted and illogical. It's a technical upgrade from the first film, but it's a massive narrative downgrade. Now, Emma Tammy's visual skill is completely swallowed by Scott Cawthon's bloated script. Now, while it's admirable for the creator to be so involved, this film is proof that what makes for compelling video game lore does not automatically make for a good movie. This story desperately needs a co-writer focused on cinematic structure, character arcs, and basic narrative logic. For the hardcore fans who live and breathe this lore, this movie might be exactly what you're wanting, but for everyone else, casual horror fans and curious moviegoers, anyone who believes a film that should tell a complete story, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is going to frustrate you, and it is a very disappointment in my eyes. If a third film is going to succeed, it has to learn the most important lesson from its sequel's failure. A good story has to come first. The lore should serve the movie, not the other way around. So after all of that, guys, for me personally, I am going to give Five Nights at Freddy's Part 2 a rating of 4.2 out of 10, and that's me being slightly generous. Okay then guys, well if you've made it this far into my video, then thank you all for stopping by and sticking around. Do you agree, or did you actually love this movie? Let's continue the discussion in the comments box below, and also guys, if you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss the next video. Okay then guys, stay safe out there, I'll see you all again very soon.